Hi, glad to see you on your channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. Have a good view. The vehicles arrived in the Soviet Union without turrets. Besides, the Americans did not provide a complete set of documentation. But then Soviet military officials were helped by the Foreign Intelligence Service. The missing drawings were secretly purchased from employees of Christie's Design Bureau and sent to the USSR. As a result, the American was underpaid $25,000. In response, he refused to go to Moscow, and that was the end of cooperation with him. On July 18, 1929, the Revolutionary Military Council of the USSR, hereinafter referred to as the Revolutionary Military Council, approved the System of Tank Tractor and Auto Armor Armament of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army, hereinafter referred to as the System. It approved the organization of armored armament of the USSR, classification of tanks and their functions in future military conflicts, reconnaissance tank, a fast, all-terrain, cheap tank or tankette, possibly floating, all-armored tank, the main tank of the Red Army, operational tank, a breakthrough tank, which was not to be drawn into battles with the enemy's anti-tank artillery and tanks, but to go into the breakthrough with a troop on the armor and develop the offensive, crushing the enemy's rear, the tank of quality reinforcement of the tanks of the reserve of the main command, a powerful medium tank with powerful armament, the powerful tank of special purpose, also belonged to the tanks of the reserve of the main command, heavy breakout tank with powerful artillery armament, capable of withstanding enemy anti-tank artillery fire, imports as doping for Soviet tank construction. At that time, the USSR practically did not produce tanks that would meet the requirements, so the whole industry had to be created from scratch. To train production and design personnel, build a production base and create design bureaus to provide the Red Army with the latest armored vehicles in the shortest possible time. On November 22, 1929, the RAF created the Department for Motorization and Mechanization of the Red Army, hereinafter, UMM. Its first head was appointed Comcore U. A. Kalepsky, an ardent supporter of accelerating the establishment of tank production through the purchase of the latest models of equipment and licenses for their production abroad. He believed that such a decision would serve as a kind of doping for the domestic tank industry. Soviet designers did not have enough time to develop their own models, as well as the necessary experience and knowledge. On December 6, 1929, a commission chaired by the head of the People's Commissariat for Tanks Industry, Sergo Orjonikidze, decided to allocate funds for the purchase of foreign tanks. Already on December 30th, the Procurement Commission under the leadership of Kalepsky and the head of the Engineering and Design Department of the UMM, S.A. Ginsburg. A. Ginsburg arrived in the USA to negotiate with the American inventor, designer, and businessman, John Walter Christie, on the possibility of purchasing several finished copies of a tank of his design, M1931, and a license to produce the vehicle in the USSR. This tank was in many ways advanced in terms of the use of the latest engineering solutions in its design. In particular, it used the suspension patented by John Christie, as well as the transverse engine arrangement, dense arrangement of units and welding during hull assembly. In addition, the tank could move both on tracks, on rough terrain, and on rubberized rollers, on freeways and highways. At that time, the M1931 was the fastest tank in the world. It had a maximum speed of 118 km/h on the highway and 67 km/h on rough terrain. However, the first impression of the tank was twofold. On the one hand, in the opinion of the head of the Procurement Committee, the Christie tank was not suitable for the role of an operational tank, where it was intended to be. On the other hand, the Polish army was interested in the tank. Captain of the Polish army Marian Rusinski in 1929, that is, before the visit of the Soviet representatives, visited John Christie's company U.S. Wheel-Track Layer Corporation in Rahway, New Jersey, where he was shown a prototype of the tank M1928 and the project of its modernized version in 1931. The officer liked the tank so much that on February 26, 1930, a delegation headed by Colonel Tadeusz Kosakowski, head of the Wyby Military Institute for Design Research, left Poland for the USA and signed a contract for the purchase of a finished model of the tank and a license to manufacture it in Poland. The Polish side even made a 50% advance payment for the future tank, but soon the Americans unilaterally terminated the contract and returned the advance payment to the Poles. The reason for this was the decision of the Soviet functionaries to purchase the M1931 from Christie's, especially since the development of their own operational tank was not going well in the USSR. The T-24 project and its introduction into production at the Kharkov locomotive plant, hereinafter KPZ, were progressing slowly. However, the main reason for the termination of the contract, apparently, was the fact that before September 17, 1939, Poland was the main likely adversary of the USSR, and the presence of the fastest tanks in the world at that time in its army would significantly complicate the situation on the western borders of the country. Therefore, Stalin spared no expense to rebuy the promising machine and steal it away from under the noses of the Poles. Americans are coming to the Union. Two M1931s totaling $60,000 were ordered, along with $4,000 worth of spare parts. Another $100,000 the USSR was obligated to pay for the right to produce these tanks for 10 years. Christie was supposed to come to the Soviet Union to help set up mass production of the tanks, but being a true capitalist, he viewed the world's first socialist state disapprovingly, to put it mildly. The designer was forced to conclude this deal only by the difficult financial circumstances in which he found himself due to the refusal of the U.S. Army to purchase his tanks. The vehicles arrived in the USSR without turrets, and in addition, the Americans did not provide a complete set of documentation. But then the Red Army functionaries were helped out by the Foreign Intelligence Service. The missing drawings were secretly acquired from the employees of Christie's Design Bureau and sent to the USSR. As a result, the American was underpaid $25,000. In response, he refused to go to Moscow, and that was the end of cooperation with him. The M1931s were shipped to the USSR on December 24, 1930. At that time, there were no diplomatic relations between the USSR and the USA, so the delivery was handled by Amtorg Trading Corporation, a joint stock company registered in the state of New York on Soviet capital and engaged in procurement and delivery of the latest equipment, technologies, and armaments to the USSR. The tanks arrived in the USSR by the spring of 1931. For the sake of secrecy, they were called Original I and Original II. One vehicle was disassembled for detailed study. The second one was sent to the test range for testing. To simulate the weight of the missing turret, additional ballast weighing 800 kilos was placed in the tank hull. On April 24, 1931, the Leningrad Bolshevik plant held a joint meeting on the tank program at the plant for 1931. The importance of the issues discussed is confirmed by the composition of the meeting participants. It was attended by Marshal Voroshilov, Marshal Tukhachevsky, Commodore Kalepsky, technical management of the Bolshevik plant, including Director Salnikov, as well as other representatives of the plant and workshops. How to make a Russian out of an American. Soon after the T-18 production was abandoned, it was decided to launch at Bolshevik the production of the T-26 tank, based on the licensed British Vickers MKE, and to organize the finalization and serial production of the BT tank, the fast tank, as the M1931 was called in the Soviet Union, at the KHPZ. This choice was not made by chance. As early as in 1928, the Special Design Bureau, hereinafter referred to as SKB, was established to develop the T-12 tank, followed by the T-24 tank, which included Moscow designers from the main design bureau of the Ordnance Arsenal Trust, as well as the T-2K Tank Design Bureau, located directly at the KHPZ under the leadership of a young engineer, I.N. Alexenko. A special tank shop was built at the plant for the Futur tank production. The necessary Machina Park was formed. During the production of tractors, Kommunar, and prototypes T-12 and T-24, the engineers and workers of the foundry mastered the process of Caterpillar tracks manufacturing. On May 17, 1931, the People's Commissariat of Armaments adopted a decision according to which the Design Bureau, under the leadership of the Soviet designer S.A. Ginsburg, was tasked to complete the tank and create a complete set of drawings for its transfer to serial production. For this purpose, a combined group of 20 designers from the OAT Design Bureau, 15 from the Scientific Automobile and Tractor Institute, 2 from the Izhora plant and 1 from the UMM was formed. In addition, the entire Tank Design Bureau of the Kharkov locomotive plant was included in it. N.M. Toskin was appointed as the project manager from UMM to manage the work in Kharkov. Since May 25th, the Design Bureau, specially created at the Kharkiv locomotive plant for the design of the BT tank, as well as the staff of 30 copying workers for reproduction of drawings, as there were no copying machines at that time, were transferred under his leadership. The plant and the Design Bureau were assigned a task. The KHPZ had to abandon the production of the T-24 and produce an experimental batch of BT tanks in the following order: 2 vehicles by 01.11.1931, 30 vehicles by 3112.1931, 100 vehicles by 051102.1932, and 2,000 vehicles by 01.12.1932. The grandiosity of the task was explained by the fact that a year earlier, the Red Army had started a large-scale reorganization of the armored forces, as a result of which the Army was to receive 4,497 new tanks. By November 1st, the Bolshevik plant was also to assemble 1 BT tank from the components that were to arrive in Leningrad from Kharkov. Kharkov sufferings. The management of the Kharkiv locomotive plant disapproved of the idea of abandoning the T-24 tank they were developing in favor of foreign equipment. Alexenko, the chief designer, also took this order in the face and, in the end, applied for dismissal, which was granted in December 1931. In the second half of May and the first half of June 1931, numerous tests were conducted on the tanks Original I and Original II, which were specified in the documentation as BT-1. They showed that the tank required serious modifications. Its gearbox was overheating. The running gear could not withstand the loads, and the front double hatch of complex configuration was inconvenient. In addition, it was necessary to recreate the turret, which had not arrived from the U.S., and equip it with a sufficiently powerful artillery armament. On June 1, 1931, the chairman of the Scientific and Technical Committee of the UMM Arka I.A. Lebedev sent to the director of the KHPZL, S. Vladimirov, the task for the design of the BT wheeled tracked light tank, approved by the head of the UMMI, A. Kalepsky. The assignment contained an order to stop the production of the T-24 tank and the development of the plant, and to concentrate all efforts on launching the BT tank into production. On September 20, 1931, the UMM of the Red Army formed Order No. 709003111, according to which the plant was ordered to produce 6 prototypes of the new tank by November 1st. One almost anecdotal circumstance is curious. For a long time, the BT-2 tanks, after leaving the experimental shop and crossing the territory of the plant, stopped as if halted, having barely reached the factory pigsty. This unfortunate pigsty became the subject of ridicule and rather cruel jokes. It was repeatedly recalled at operational meetings of the plant director, in the conversations of specialists, and even in the offices of the main armor department of the USSR Defense Commissariat. When the tank finally managed to safely pass the pigsty and move on, it was perceived as a significant event at the plant. The order was not fulfilled in full. Only 3 tanks were produced by November 1st. Since the Ijorsky Zavod did not have time to master the production of armor that was difficult to manufacture, the hulls of the first 13 tanks and their turrets were assembled from sheets of ordinary structural steel. The next 53 turrets were made of the same material as the Mariupol plant. The Ilich Iron and Steel Works was also unable to master the difficult-to-produce D-steel developed by engineer Durenkov. The towers made of this steel developed cracks, and due to a huge percentage of rejections, the parts that passed acceptance were extremely expensive. Therefore, at the end of 1932, Mariupol began to produce turrets and armor plates from steel of its own brand MI, which stood for Mariupol Ilich. It consisted of 2 layers, a hard outer layer and a more ductile inner layer, due to which its bulletproofness was much higher than that of PI steel produced by the Izhorsk plant. However, the cost of this armor was also very high, as 11 tons of every 12 tons of armor plate were rejected. On November 7, 1931, 3 finished tanks took part in a parade that took place in the center of Kharkov, at that time the capital of the Ukrainian SSR. One of these tanks had an engine spontaneous combustion and did not make it to the parade site, and the other 2 vehicles left the streets of the city after the parade with difficulty due to gearbox failures. Due to delays in the delivery of armor plates and turrets for the BT from the Izhora plant, only 3 sets were sent to Kharkov in 1931. There were also problems with the serial production of the vehicle. As a result, by the end of the year, Toskin was recalled to Moscow, and in his place in Kharkov arrived convicted former designer of the Leningrad plant, Russian Diesel, A.O. Fursov, who was replaced by 5 years in camps to work at the Kharkov plant. In search of an optimal design initially, the BT was planned to be equipped with a V-shaped 27-liter liquid-cooled M5 aircraft engine with an output of 400 HP, a copy of the American Liberty L-12. But just in 1930 it was removed from production in favor of the more powerful M17 engine, and there were simply no power plants for the new tank. Therefore, it was decided to purchase engines for production BT tanks, including those used in the USA, in order to install them on Soviet combat vehicles after overhaul. In operation, the Liberty L-12 engines proved to be unreliable and capricious, constantly failing, spontaneously combusting, poorly starting at low temperatures and consuming a lot of castor oil. Their positive characteristic was only relatively long motor life, 450 hours. Problems also arose with the armament of the tank. The 37mm PS2 gun of the 1930 model designed by Syakintov turned out to be too complicated to produce for the Soviet industry of that time. On August 28, 1930, a contract was signed through the German company Butast, through which the Soviet Union managed to purchase 6 copies of the 37mm anti-tank gun from the German corporation Rheinmetall. In the near future, it was to become the famous 3.7 mm PK 35-36 anti-tank gun, and its Soviet version was produced at Plant No. 8 near Moscow, where it received the factory index 1K. Based on the barrel of this gun system, the B-3 tank gun was developed, factory index 5K, which was installed on the BT tanks. In the summer of 1931, Plant Number 8 received an order to produce 350 twin-tank mounts of the B-3 gun with 7.62 HM-DT machine gun for the BT tanks. However, by the end of the year it turned out that the main artillery department of the Red Army GAU had failed to fulfill the task. The twin cannon was never designed, so a new turret had to be created for the first tanks, in which the machine gun was placed to the right of the gun mask in a separately mounted ball-mounted unit. The 60 turrets already produced by the Izhorsky Zavod without a hole for the ball mount were armed only with a cannon, so some of the first production BT tanks were deprived of machine gun armament. The next 240 turrets produced by Izhorsk and Mariupol plants, 120 pieces each, were produced for separately mounted B-3 cannon and 7.62 mm DT machine gun. But Plant Number 8 could not fully fulfill the plan of production of 350 B-3 guns, as it produced them in a semi-artisanal way without a ready set of technical documents necessary for the organization of a full industrial cycle of production. The guns were accepted by the Military Acceptance Committee slowly, with creaking and a high percentage of rejections, so the 190 guns produced were not enough for all BT tanks. Besides, according to the new approved plans, 620 tanks were to be produced. Therefore, it was decided to replace the cannon on individual vehicles with a DT-2 or DA-2 twin gun of two 7.62 mm tank or air machine guns of Degtyaryov system. Starting from the IV quarter of 1933, the twin machine guns together with armored masks were sent directly to tank units of the Red Army. The unarmed BT-2s were transferred to the units earlier so that tankers could start to master them. Machine gun mounts were installed on the vehicles in military units by their repair services. As a result, serial BT tanks had 4 variants of armament: cannon gun armament, machine gun armament, twin machine gun, reinforced machine gun armament, twin machine gun plus DT machine gun in a ball-mounted unit. Starting with the 301st vehicle, it was planned to mount the BT tank with a new design turret with a 45 mm 20K gun, a copy of the German 45 mm analog, with a twin DT machine gun. A single turret was designed for both the BT and T-26 tanks, but it was installed on the new model, the BT-5. Attempts were made to mount the 45 mm gun in the old turret, but this was abandoned as there was too little room for the crew. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. See you soon.